If you can barely afford the gas for that thing, you probably cannot afford anything in this showroom. The manager's words drifted across the polished dealership floor before the black woman had even stepped completely out of her aging sedan, and several customers nearby turned their heads just in time to catch the faint smile spreading across his face. The dealership sat beneath a bright Texas morning sky, its massive glass walls reflecting rows of luxury vehicles lined up like works of art. Every surface gleamed, every chrome detail sparkled, and parked near the edge of the lot sat a 15-year-old sedan with faded paint and a small dent near the rear bumper. The contrast was impossible to miss. The woman closed her car door gently and stood still for a moment. She looked to be in her early 40s, dressed in a simple navy blazer, comfortable slacks, and practical shoes. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, no obvious signs of extraordinary wealth. Yet there was something unusual about the calm way she carried herself. While other customers often arrived looking impressed by the luxury around them, she seemed completely unaffected. Her eyes moved across the building with quiet observation, as though she had seen places far grander than this. The manager, Daniel Mercer, watched from the entrance with his hands folded confidently across his chest. He had spent nearly 2 decades selling high-end vehicles and believed he could estimate a person's purchasing power within seconds. To him, appearances told the entire story, and the story standing in front of him looked unremarkable. Several sales associates noticed the exchange. One young employee glanced toward the woman with visible discomfort. Another lowered his eyes and pretended to organize paperwork. Nobody said anything. Daniel's reputation inside the dealership was well known. He was successful. He generated enormous revenue, and success had convinced him that his judgments were usually correct. The woman began walking toward the showroom. Her pace was relaxed. She did not rush. She did not react to the comment. That seemed to irritate Daniel more than if she had argued. As she approached, he forced a customer service smile that never reached his eyes. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. The question sounded polite, but the tone underneath carried a different message. The woman returned a small smile. "Yes," she said calmly. "I am interested in looking at your highest-end models." Daniel almost laughed. Around them, sunlight poured through the enormous windows, illuminating vehicles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He followed her gaze toward a limited-edition luxury sedan displayed on a rotating platform at the center of the showroom. Most customers stopped to admire it. Very few could afford it. Daniel immediately assumed she was one of those people. Someone who wanted to dream for an afternoon before returning to reality. What he did not know was that the woman had not driven across the city because she wanted to admire a car. She had come for a reason, a very specific reason, and hidden behind her calm expression was information that would soon force everyone in that building to reconsider everything they thought they understood about wealth, success, and the danger of judging a person before learning their story. The woman studied the luxury sedan displayed beneath the showroom lights as though she were evaluating a business proposal rather than a vehicle, her eyes moving carefully across every detail while Daniel Mercer remained only a few feet away, watching her with the quiet amusement of someone convinced he already knew how the story would end. Around them, customers drifted through the showroom, admiring polished paint, leather interiors, and price tags that often exceeded the value of an average American home. The dealership had built its reputation on exclusivity. Wealth was expected here. Status was assumed, and Daniel believed he had become an expert at identifying both within seconds. "That model starts well above $200,000, he said casually. "Many customers prefer to begin with something more practical." The woman turned toward him. Her expression never changed. "I did not ask for something practical," she replied. "I asked about that vehicle." Daniel forced another smile. Several nearby sales associates pretended not to listen while clearly following every word. One young employee named Ryan stood behind a reception desk organizing brochures, but even he could sense the tension beginning to build. The woman continued examining the sedan. She asked thoughtful questions about performance specifications, engineering details, maintenance programs, and customization options. Her knowledge surprised Ryan. Most visitors asked about colors or monthly payments. She asked questions that sounded more like those of an investor studying a company. Daniel noticed it too, but instead of reconsidering his assumptions, he convinced himself she had simply researched the vehicle online. In his mind, appearance still outweighed evidence. The woman eventually walked around the display platform and stopped beside the driver's door. Soft lighting reflected across the polished surface. "How many of these have you sold?" she asked. Daniel straightened his tie. "Enough to know who is serious and who is not." The words hung in the air longer than he intended. Ryan looked down immediately. Another employee shifted uncomfortably nearby. Yet the woman simply nodded as if Daniel had revealed something important about himself. Through the glass walls of the showroom, her old sedan remained visible in the parking lot. The faded paint and worn appearance seemed completely out of place among luxury vehicles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Daniel glanced toward it repeatedly, almost as though the car itself justified every assumption he had made. What he could not know was that the vehicle represented a personal choice rather than a financial limitation. The woman had owned it for years. She liked it. It reminded her of a different chapter of life. Success had never convinced her to replace things simply because she could. Ryan finally approached carrying a brochure. "Would you like information about available configurations?" he asked politely. "Yes," the woman answered warmly. It was the first genuinely friendly interaction she had experienced since entering the dealership. Ryan handed her the material, and she thanked him. Daniel watched the exchange with mild irritation. The situation no longer felt as amusing as it had earlier. Something about her confidence continued to challenge his expectations. She never acted impressed. She never acted intimidated. She behaved like someone entirely comfortable in any room she entered. As she reviewed the brochure, her phone vibrated briefly. She glanced at the screen and smiled faintly before placing it back inside her purse. The message had come from a private financial office managing assets worth billions of dollars. Yet nobody inside the dealership knew that. To them, she remained a woman who had arrived in an old car. And while Daniel continued judging what he could see, he remained completely blind to the reality standing directly in front of him. As the discussion about configurations continued, Daniel Mercer could feel his own assumptions unraveling bit by bit. He had expected hesitation, deference, and awe, yet none of that appeared in the woman's demeanor, her posture composed, her eyes calm and assessing, a contrast to the polished chaos of the luxury dealership around them. He offered suggestions on interior finishes, technology packages, and even financing options, assuming she might falter or hesitate, but her responses were precise, thoughtful, and deliberate, revealing an intelligence and confidence that far exceeded casual interest. Other employees observed discreetly from a distance, noting the quiet authority she carried without raising her voice, commanding attention simply by being herself, her presence subtle yet undeniable. Daniel, growing slightly uneasy, tried to redirect the conversation, emphasizing exclusivity and the prestige of ownership, but she smiled knowingly, asking questions that reflected both curiosity and command over financial knowledge. She inquired about asset management, investment strategies tied to luxury acquisitions, and the long-term value of high-end vehicles, demonstrating awareness of market dynamics Daniel had not anticipated from someone appearing in an older, modest sedan. Each of her comments subtly reminded him of his misjudgment, the gap between perception and reality widening with every exchange. The showroom's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly, energy building as if others sensed the unspoken tension between assumption and truth. Daniel made a casual remark about delivery times, hoping to regain control of the situation, yet her calm, deliberate responses rendered him increasingly uncertain. It became apparent she was not merely another client. Her engagement suggested power and influence, a breadth of experience far beyond ordinary patronage. A brief pause in the conversation allowed both to observe each other more keenly, Daniel noting her composed aura, the subtle confidence in her gestures, the way she scanned brochures and displays with a methodical eye, and she, in turn, seemingly aware of his underlying assumptions, evaluating his demeanor as one might assess a potential business partner rather than a salesman. Outside the glass windows, sunlight reflected off the polished exteriors of expensive vehicles parked meticulously, a visual reminder of the disparity between appearances and substance. As the interaction continued, Daniel's earlier certainty diminished. Every carefully crafted assumption about status, wealth, and judgment confronted a reality that he could not see in his initial evaluation. While he analyzed color combinations, horsepower, and price tags, she processed context, influence, and strategy, embodying a presence that commanded respect without demanding it, an intellectual authority that contrasted sharply with Daniel's initial superficial assessment. By the end of the meeting, the balance of perception had shifted. Daniel understood that appearances had misled him, and that a deeper reality of power and ownership resided in the woman before him, the very person he had underestimated based solely on her vehicle and outward presentation, a lesson in humility, perception, and the unseen truths that define influence and success in spaces dominated by assumptions and appearances. Daniel Mercer spent the next several minutes trying to regain the confidence he had carried so naturally earlier that morning, but the effort became increasingly difficult with every question the woman asked. She moved through the showroom at an unhurried pace, stopping occasionally beside vehicles that most customers viewed as unreachable dreams, yet she examined them with the calm practicality of someone evaluating tools rather than symbols of status. The distinction unsettled him. Wealthy buyers often wanted attention. They wanted admiration. They enjoyed discussing exclusivity and prestige. This woman seemed interested only in value, performance, craftsmanship, and long-term strategy. As they approached another luxury model displayed beneath a ring of soft white lights, Daniel attempted to steer the conversation back toward familiar territory. Many clients who consider vehicles at this level prefer to discuss financing options early, he said. It helps establish realistic expectations. The words sounded professional, but several employees nearby immediately understood the implication. Ryan, standing near a display counter, lowered his eyes again. The woman looked at Daniel for a moment before answering. Realistic expectations are important, she said calmly. That is true in business as well. Something in her response made Daniel feel as though she had answered a different question entirely. Around them, the dealership remained busy. Sales associates escorted customers between rows of polished vehicles. Soft music drifted through hidden speakers. The scent of fresh leather lingered in the air. Yet despite the activity surrounding them, Daniel could feel his attention narrowing toward the woman and the growing uncertainty she created. She continued asking questions, but now her focus shifted beyond automobiles. She asked about the dealership's ownership structure, customer retention rates, and expansion plans. Daniel answered automatically at first, assuming casual curiosity. Then she began asking about regional performance numbers, inventory turnover, and executive leadership decisions. His confidence faltered. Most customers never discussed such topics. Most customers never even knew they existed. The woman listened carefully to every answer. Occasionally she nodded. Occasionally she made brief observations that suggested a surprisingly deep understanding of business operations. Each comment landed with quiet precision. Daniel began wondering who she really was. The thought irritated him because it forced him to question assumptions he had considered obvious only an hour earlier. Through the glass walls, her old sedan remained parked beneath the bright afternoon sun. Every time he glanced toward it, he used it as evidence to reassure himself. Yet the reassurance lasted only seconds before another thoughtful question challenged it again. Ryan eventually approached with a bottle of water and offered it to the woman. She thanked him warmly. Unlike Daniel, Ryan had stopped trying to categorize her. He simply treated her with respect. The difference did not go unnoticed. The woman smiled and asked his name. When he answered, she remembered it immediately. Daniel found himself strangely uncomfortable watching the exchange. A few minutes later, a senior employee emerged from a private office carrying a tablet. He paused briefly after noticing the woman. His expression changed almost instantly. Not shock, not confusion, recognition. The moment lasted only a second before he continued walking, but the woman noticed it. So did Daniel. Neither said anything. Yet for the first time that day, Daniel felt a small knot tighten in his stomach. Somewhere beyond the showroom floor, information existed that he did not have. And as the woman continued her quiet tour of the dealership, completely composed and entirely unbothered by his earlier remarks, the distance between what Daniel believed and what was actually true continued growing larger with every passing minute. By the time they reached the executive offices, Daniel Mercer felt his confidence slipping like sand through fingers he had thought steady. The woman moved with composed authority, asking detailed questions about each department's performance metrics, staff efficiency, and client engagement strategies, yet she did so without any hint of condescension, merely seeking clarity and understanding, her presence commanding attention without demanding it, and every interaction highlighted the stark contrast between her insight and the casual assumptions Daniel had brought into the building, assumptions that evaporated quickly under her precise, thoughtful inquiries, leaving him scrambling to keep pace while maintaining professional courtesy. She paused at a display of office plans, noting layouts, meeting room configurations, and resource allocation, all with a calculating eye that seemed to measure both practicality and potential, causing Daniel to realize she was assessing not only the business itself but also the people who operated it, a layer of evaluation that few clients ever considered. And as she discussed workflow optimization with him, he found himself appreciating the clarity and logic in her observations while simultaneously feeling the uneasy sensation that he was being measured in ways beyond typical sales interactions. The receptionist watched quietly, sensing the unusual energy in the room, and as the woman moved past, she complimented the arrangement of the offices, noting elements that enhanced efficiency and employee comfort, her tone neutral yet assertive, leaving no room for misinterpretation, and Daniel struggled to match her level of precision in his responses, realizing that each answer required careful consideration, as any misstep could inadvertently reveal a lack of understanding he could not afford to show. They continued into the boardroom, where she asked about leadership structures, decision-making protocols, and strategic planning processes, eliciting detailed explanations from Daniel that he delivered with a mixture of nervous energy and professional polish, aware that every word was evaluated. Yet he could not ignore the subtle ways her questions revealed her comprehensive grasp of organizational dynamics, prompting him to reconsider not only his approach to the meeting but also his assumptions about who she was, her calm demeanor masking the formidable intellect and authority she wielded effortlessly. When she inquired about client acquisition strategies and financial oversight, Daniel provided the data requested, yet he sensed the depth of her analysis extended beyond numbers, understanding that she was calculating implications, anticipating outcomes, and gauging the capacity of the business to adapt, a perspective so holistic that it left him feeling both impressed and slightly intimidated, while the rest of the office staff seemed to defer naturally to her, acknowledging an authority that transcended traditional client relationships. As the conversation progressed, Daniel noticed subtle exchanges between her and other staff members, brief glances, respectful nods, and quiet attentiveness, all indicating an unspoken recognition of her status and competence, a realization that heightened his awareness of the social dynamics at play and emphasized the growing disparity between his initial perception of the meeting and the reality of the woman's commanding presence, leaving him acutely conscious that this encounter would be remembered long after it ended, not only for the content of the discussions but for the unmistakable impression left by a client whose authority and insight were undeniable, setting a new standard for professional interactions and reshaping the expectations Daniel held for every future engagement. Daniel Mercer barely noticed how much time had passed since the woman first arrived at the dealership. The afternoon sun now cast long golden reflections across the showroom floor, stretching between rows of luxury vehicles and polished glass walls. Yet despite the changing light outside, his attention remained fixed on the woman whose presence continued to challenge every conclusion he had drawn earlier that morning. She sat calmly at a conference table overlooking the main showroom, reviewing a portfolio of vehicle specifications and dealership information, while several senior employees quietly gathered nearby. The atmosphere felt different now. What had begun as a routine customer interaction had evolved into something far more significant, although Daniel still could not fully understand why. The woman listened carefully as department representatives explained various services offered by the dealership, from concierge delivery programs to custom vehicle sourcing and private client support. Her questions remained thoughtful and surprisingly detailed. She asked about customer retention trends, employee training standards, and long-term client relationships. Each answer seemed to lead naturally into another question, revealing an understanding of business operations that extended far beyond automobiles. Daniel noticed that she rarely spoke about herself. Instead, she focused on people, systems, and performance. The pattern intrigued him. Most affluent customers wanted attention directed toward their preferences. This woman directed attention toward the quality of the organization itself, Across the room, Ryan observed the interaction with growing curiosity. Unlike Daniel, he no longer viewed her through the lens of assumptions. He simply saw someone intelligent, respectful, and remarkably composed. Every employee who interacted with her seemed to respond positively. Even staff members who had never spoken directly with her found themselves watching quietly, sensing that something important was unfolding beneath the surface. At one point, the woman paused to look through the large glass windows toward the parking lot. Her aging sedan remained parked exactly where she had left it. Daniel followed her gaze. For a brief moment neither said anything. Then she smiled softly. "That car has been with me through some important years," she said. Daniel nodded politely. He expected her to explain why she had not replaced it. Instead, she simply returned her attention to the discussion. The silence that followed seemed to carry its own lesson. Throughout his career, Daniel had associated value with appearance. The newest car, the most expensive watch, the most impressive title. Yet the woman sitting across from him appeared completely uninterested in using possessions to prove anything. As the meeting continued, a senior regional executive entered the room carrying several folders. The moment he noticed the woman, his expression shifted noticeably. He approached immediately and greeted her with genuine respect. Not the polished courtesy reserved for customers. Something deeper. Something personal. Daniel observed the exchange carefully. The executive thanked her for taking the time to visit and mentioned that several people had been looking forward to meeting her in person. The comment caught Daniel completely off guard. Looking forward to meeting her? Why would regional leadership be anticipating the arrival of an ordinary customer? The woman responded warmly but offered no explanation. Instead, she asked a few final questions about dealership culture and future growth plans. The executive answered thoughtfully, treating every question with unusual seriousness. Daniel felt a growing sense of unease. Piece by piece, the image he had created that morning was collapsing. Every clue pointed toward a reality far different from the one he had imagined. Yet the full truth remained just beyond reach. And as the conversation moved toward its conclusion, Daniel could not shake the feeling that a revelation was approaching, one that would force everyone in the dealership to see the woman not as she appeared, but as she truly was. As the afternoon sun filtered through the expansive glass windows of the dealership, Daniel Mercer felt a tension in the air that he could no longer ignore. The woman seated across from him had been quietly absorbing every detail of the discussion, her posture poised, her expression calm yet unwavering, and every so often she offered a subtle nod or a carefully measured question that revealed a depth of understanding that far surpassed the assumptions Daniel had made about her earlier. Employees moved around the showroom floor, but their attention frequently flicked toward her, sensing an authority that did not rely on titles or appearances. Across the table, Ryan felt his earlier judgments slipping away as he observed the way she effortlessly navigated conversations about client management, operational strategy, and team accountability. Her insight into financial details, staff performance, and long-term client relations was precise, showing a combination of experience, intellect, and composure that commanded attention without ever raising her voice or asserting dominance. Daniel noticed the reactions of his colleagues. The regional executive subtly straightened his posture, other department heads exchanged glances, and junior staff paused mid-task, all recognizing a presence that demanded genuine respect. At one point, she asked a seemingly casual question about a policy change, and the way she framed it exposed an understanding of broader business implications, causing Daniel to realize that every answer she received was being silently measured against standards of excellence he had not anticipated. Her calm demeanor and the elegance of her questioning created an atmosphere where assumptions were quietly dismantled, leaving everyone in the room questioning what they thought they knew. Daniel tried to maintain composure, but each new insight she shared chipped away at the narrative he had constructed about her role, making him acutely aware that her influence extended far beyond that of a regular client. Ryan, observing quietly, could sense the subtle power dynamics shifting as the woman engaged with staff and executives alike, prompting moments of reflection, curiosity, and even admiration. Outside the office, the light continued to shift, casting long shadows across the polished floors, highlighting the contrast between the simplicity of her presence and the complex reality of her authority. Conversations, once transactional and procedural, had transformed into discussions that challenged preconceptions, emphasized strategic thinking, and demanded attention to both detail and foresight. As the meeting neared its end, Daniel felt a profound shift in understanding. The woman was not merely present to evaluate the dealership. She was demonstrating a mastery of observation, decision-making, and influence that made every participant reconsider their initial perceptions. There was no overt declaration of power, no need for forceful assertions, yet her presence alone reshaped interactions, revealed hidden insights, and demanded respect in a way that left the room silent with realization. In that moment, Daniel understood that the day's encounter would forever alter the way he approached judgment, leadership, and the recognition of true authority, as the woman concluded her questions with a measured, knowing smile, leaving an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed her quiet yet undeniable command. The morning light spilled through the towering glass walls of the corporate office, illuminating the sharp lines of the furniture and the poised figure of the woman as she moved confidently between meetings, her presence commanding subtle attention without a word. She navigated the complex rhythms of business negotiations with a calm authority, noting every hesitation, every unspoken reaction, and responding with measured clarity that made even the most seasoned executives reconsider their positions, while the young manager, initially brash and dismissive, observed quietly from across the room, his expression flickering between disbelief and growing awareness as her strategic insights exposed assumptions he had not recognized, revealing her deep understanding of finance, operational efficiency, and client dynamics, and the way she gently corrected misconceptions or offered alternative approaches highlighted a mastery of influence and leadership that demanded respect, not through force, but through intellect, timing, and presence, as the atmosphere shifted subtly with each interaction, creating a tension filled with anticipation and reflection, every conversation turning into a lesson in strategic thinking and personal accountability, the hum of office activity providing a backdrop that contrasted sharply with the focused intensity between them, and as she engaged with different team members, her ability to read and adapt to their responses underscored her experience and authority, making even casual remarks carry weight, and prompting reconsideration of previously held judgments. The manager's pride slowly giving way to a grudging respect as he recognized the full scope of her influence and the silent power she wielded with composure, and with each passing moment, the office seemed to respond to her energy, deadlines, proposals, and client discussions unfolding under her guidance in a rhythm that highlighted her capacity to lead through understanding and insight rather than overt control, until finally, as the morning meetings concluded, the subtle shift in dynamics left everyone more alert, more attentive, and aware that the woman was not just another client but a figure whose presence had redefined the expectations of competence, authority, and respect within the corporate space, leaving an indelible impression on the manager and his colleagues, demonstrating that true leadership could manifest quietly, efficiently, and undeniably through expertise, composure, and the ability to influence without intimidation. All the while she maintained her poise, subtly altering perceptions and inspiring reflection across the room. As the day moved deeper into the afternoon, a subtle change spread throughout the dealership, one that Daniel Mercer could feel even if he could not yet explain it. Conversations lowered when the woman entered a room. Department managers became noticeably more attentive. Senior staff who normally delegated introductions chose to greet her personally. None of it was dramatic, yet each interaction added another piece to a puzzle Daniel had been trying unsuccessfully to solve since morning. The woman remained exactly as she had been from the moment she arrived in her aging sedan, calm, observant, and completely unaffected by the shifting atmosphere around her. She spent the next hour reviewing customer experience programs, employee development initiatives, and long-term growth projections. Her questions continued to reveal a remarkable understanding of business strategy. She did not focus only on profits. She asked about employee retention. She asked about customer trust. She asked about how management responded when staff members made mistakes. The questions surprised people because they reflected concerns normally associated with ownership rather than purchasing. Daniel noticed it too. Each time she spoke, executives answered with unusual care, weighing every response before giving it. Eventually the group returned to a private conference room overlooking the showroom floor. Through the glass walls, luxury vehicles gleamed beneath carefully positioned lights while customers continued browsing below. The woman stood near the window for a moment, studying the activity in silence. The scene looked almost symbolic to Daniel. Down below were appearances. Up here was reality. And for the first time he began wondering whether he had spent too much of his career confusing the two. Ryan entered carrying several reports, requested by senior leadership. As he placed them on the table, he noticed the respect with which regional executives interacted with the woman. Their body language was impossible to ignore. They listened carefully. They rarely interrupted. They seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. Daniel followed every exchange, searching for clues. Then another unexpected moment occurred. A phone call arrived for the regional executive. The man answered quietly, listened for several seconds, and then glanced toward the woman. His expression changed immediately. Respect became something closer to anticipation. After ending the call, he informed everyone that corporate leadership would be arriving shortly. The announcement created an immediate reaction. Managers adjusted schedules. Staff members exchanged curious looks. Yet the woman simply nodded as though the news had been expected. Daniel felt another wave of uncertainty. Why would corporate leadership visit a local dealership on such short notice? More importantly, why did the woman seem entirely unsurprised? As preparations quietly began, Daniel found himself reflecting on the first comment he had made that morning. What had seemed harmless at the time now felt increasingly reckless. Every hour since then had exposed another flaw in his assumptions. The old sedan, the simple clothing, the calm demeanor. He had mistaken simplicity for limitation. He had confused humility with lack of influence. Looking across the conference room, he realized that the woman had never once attempted to correct him. She had never demanded recognition. She had never mentioned accomplishments or status. Instead, she had simply allowed her actions, knowledge, and character to speak for themselves. Outside, the sunlight began fading toward evening, casting warm reflections across the glass walls. Inside, anticipation continued building. Corporate executives were on their way. Senior managers were preparing for their arrival. And although Daniel still did not know the full truth, he could feel it approaching with every passing minute. Somewhere beyond the assumptions that had shaped his entire day stood a reality far greater than anything he had imagined, and very soon that reality would no longer remain hidden. The arrival of corporate leadership transformed the atmosphere of the dealership almost instantly. What had been quiet anticipation moments earlier became focused preparation as managers adjusted schedules, employees straightened displays, and department heads gathered near the main conference room. Outside, the late afternoon sky glowed with warm shades of gold and amber, reflecting across the dealership's glass exterior. Inside, every conversation seemed slightly quieter than before. Everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. The woman remained exactly where she had been, seated comfortably at the conference table overlooking the showroom floor. She showed no sign of nervousness, no indication that the approaching executives held any special significance. Daniel Mercer noticed that detail immediately. Most people became visibly anxious around senior corporate leadership. She appeared entirely at ease. A few minutes later, several black vehicles arrived outside the building. Through the conference room windows, employees watched as corporate executives entered the dealership. Conversations stopped. Staff members exchanged curious glances. The regional executive moved quickly to greet the visitors. Daniel stood as well, expecting the customary introductions and formalities. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. The moment the senior executives entered the conference room, their attention shifted directly toward the woman. The most senior executive in the group approached her immediately with a warm smile and extended hand. "It is wonderful to finally meet you in person," he said. The room fell completely silent. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The woman stood and returned the greeting with calm familiarity. There was nothing awkward or surprising in her reaction. It felt as though the meeting had been expected all along. One by one, the other executives introduced themselves. Each interaction carried the same unmistakable tone of respect. Not customer service. Not salesmanship. Respect. Genuine respect. Daniel watched carefully, trying to understand what he was seeing. The pieces of the puzzle that had confused him all day suddenly began moving into place. The executives took seats around the conference table. The woman joined them as an equal. Not beside them. Not across from them. With them. The distinction was impossible to ignore. The discussion that followed centered on investment strategies, expansion opportunities, long-term partnerships, and future growth initiatives. Daniel listened in disbelief as the woman spoke with remarkable authority on every topic. She referenced market conditions, asset performance, and business acquisitions with a level of expertise that immediately commanded the room's attention. More importantly, the executives listened carefully to her recommendations. They asked for her opinion. They requested her perspective. They treated her observations as essential. Then came the moment that finally shattered every remaining assumption. During a discussion about future investments, one executive casually referenced her private investment group, a financial organization responsible for managing assets valued in the billions. The statement landed with the force of absolute clarity. Daniel felt every earlier comment replay through his mind. The old sedan. The dismissive jokes. The assumptions. The subtle condescension. All of it. The woman never reacted to the revelation. She simply continued the discussion as though nothing unusual had been said. For her it was ordinary truth. For everyone else in the room it changed everything. Ryan looked toward Daniel briefly. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The realization had become impossible to avoid. The woman who had arrived that morning in a worn vehicle, the woman Daniel had judged before learning a single fact about her, was not merely wealthy. She was one of the most influential clients the company had ever encountered. And as the evening sunlight faded beyond the glass walls, Daniel understood that the lesson unfolding before him had very little to do with money, and everything to do with the danger of mistaking appearances for reality. As the meeting continued, the subtle hum of the air conditioning and distant city noises formed a backdrop to a scenario that had grown increasingly intense without any overt confrontation. The woman maintained an unwavering composure, her gaze fixed thoughtfully on the spreadsheet projected across the conference room screen while the executives around her absorbed every word, every calculation, and every suggestion she offered, realizing gradually that their initial assumptions about her status and influence had been entirely mistaken. Daniel Mercer, sitting slightly to the side, felt a mix of astonishment and admiration as he observed the way she navigated complex financial strategies with calm authority, referencing market trends, investment portfolios, and projected outcomes in a manner that demonstrated expertise far beyond what anyone in the room had anticipated, compelling the room to listen, question, and validate her opinions without hesitation, as though she were the anchor for every discussion point. The senior executive, who had initially greeted her with a polite but guarded demeanor, now leaned forward, asking detailed questions about expansion projections and operational efficiencies. Each inquiry met with precise, confident answers that clarified ambiguities and provided actionable insights, reinforcing her position not just as a client but as a strategic partner whose knowledge and decisions held substantial weight. Across the table, other managers whispered to one another, their expressions a blend of disbelief and newfound respect, recognizing that the woman's unassuming presence belied her influential capacity to shape decisions that affected both immediate operations and long-term corporate strategy. Daniel caught subtle nods and approving gestures among the executives, signals that indicated complete acknowledgement of her authority and the recalibration of any previously held judgments, while outside the conference room, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow that highlighted the sharp contrast between the initial perception of the woman in her modest vehicle and the undeniable reality of her standing as a formidable figure within the financial world. As the discussion shifted toward risk assessment and resource allocation, she outlined priorities with clarity, suggesting innovative approaches that balance caution with opportunity, drawing on her experience in managing high-value assets and strategic investments, and providing context that not only educated the executives but also guided them toward decisions that had previously seemed uncertain or complex. The conversation flowed seamlessly from one topic to another, with the woman maintaining a steady, authoritative rhythm. Illustra. The conference room settled into a rhythm as the discussion advanced, each participant leaning in to absorb the insights provided by the woman whose presence had transformed the energy of the room. She gestured subtly toward the presentation screen, highlighting key projections and metrics that illustrated the potential for growth and efficiency, her voice steady, articulate, and commanding attention without raising volume or forcing agreement. allowing her expertise to naturally guide the executives toward recognition of the depth of her strategic thinking. Daniel Mercer watched intently from across the table, noting the nuanced reactions of colleagues who had initially underestimated her, seeing their eyebrows lift, nods exchanged, and pens poised over notebooks as they captured the precise observations she made about market trends, operational adjustments, and risk mitigation strategies, all framed in a manner that balanced practicality with visionary foresight. The room's atmosphere shifted from polite skepticism to engaged collaboration as she seamlessly navigated questions about resource allocation, investment timing, and long-term planning, her answers punctuated with examples from her own experience managing diverse portfolios and navigating complex business environments, each anecdote reinforcing her credibility and reframing the executive's understanding of her influence. Subtle cues from the senior management, like leaning forward and making eye contact, indicated a full acknowledgement of her authority, while Daniel noted how even minor comments, previously intended to test her knowledge, were now met with precise, confident elaboration that clarified misunderstandings and reinforced her position as an essential contributor to decision-making processes. The dialogue expanded into broader considerations of corporate strategy, innovation, and operational resilience, with her leading the group through analytical comparisons, risk assessments, and projected outcomes, inviting input while clearly steering the conversation toward actionable conclusions that would directly inform company policies and priorities, demonstrating a mastery of both detail and overarching strategic perspective. The executives began to appreciate not just the factual information she presented, but also the methodical approach she employed in synthesizing complex data into clear, implementable recommendations, a process that illuminated the value of integrating her perspective into ongoing and future initiatives. Daniel felt a growing sense of admiration as he realized the impact of perception and the consequences of initial assumptions based on appearance, noting the contrast between her unassuming demeanor and the authority she wielded through knowledge, preparation, and subtle influence. As the session concluded, the executives expressed sincere gratitude, recognizing that their understanding of leadership, insight, and the breadth of strategic oversight had been significantly expanded, and she responded with composed acknowledgement, ensuring the final remarks maintained the professional, authoritative tone that had defined the entire meeting, leaving a lasting impression that would shape corporate decisions, interactions, and respect for expertise far beyond that afternoon's discussions. The boardroom had emptied, leaving a quiet hum of residual energy in the air, the woman remaining seated with a composed posture as she reviewed the notes from the meeting, her mind already shifting to the next steps that would ensure the insights shared translated into tangible outcomes. Daniel Mercer approached cautiously, his earlier apprehension replaced by a newfound respect, acknowledging silently the depth of expertise and the strategic vision that had guided the discussions, realizing how initial judgments had been profoundly mistaken, and how competence and authority were not defined by appearances but by preparation, clarity of thought, and the ability to communicate effectively under pressure. As the afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, the ambient light catching the subtle expressions of satisfaction and relief among the remaining executives, the woman outlined precise action items, timelines, and delegation responsibilities with an air of calm confidence, her instructions detailed yet approachable, ensuring that each member understood their role in executing the agreed-upon strategies, while also encouraging follow-up dialogue to refine processes and maintain alignment across departments. Daniel observed the interactions with increasing awareness, noting how her calm assertiveness created an environment where collaboration thrived, questions were answered thoroughly without defensiveness, and strategic adjustments were welcomed as opportunities for improvement, reinforcing her leadership presence and the impact of informed decision-making. On organizational cohesion, outside the boardroom, colleagues discussed the meeting in hushed tones, acknowledging the shift in perception, recognizing that the woman's meticulous preparation, strategic foresight, and measured demeanor had not only guided decisions but had also reshaped the corporate culture, instilling a renewed appreciation for expertise, mutual respect, and the value of attentive listening, all while maintaining professional decorum and a focus on results rather than personal bias. As the last of the team departed, the woman closed her laptop, reflecting on the progress made and the relationship strengthened through transparency, insight, and leadership grounded in competence rather than assumption. Daniel beside her offering a nod of acknowledgement for the lessons learned in humility, observation, and the power of informed leadership. The scene concluded with a sense of resolution and forward momentum, the quiet confidence she exuded leaving an indelible impression on both the corporate environment and the individuals who had participated, illustrating how a single presence, guided by knowledge, preparation, and professionalism, could redefine expectations, elevate collective understanding, and inspire lasting respect across all levels of an organization.